The root cause of the disruption to navigation in the strait lies in the war in Iran, and the way forward is to bring about a ceasefire and end the war as soon as possible. All parties should remain calm and exercise restraint. China is willing to continue playing a positive and constructive role.
Is China now drawing a clear red line as tensions rise over Trump's naval blockade threat in the Strait of Hormuz? An ally of Iran has pushed back against Washington, urging Trump to remain calm and exercise restraint amid escalating developments. With US-Iran talks failing to deliver results, is China now increasing pressure by calling for an immediate end to the conflict? And while publicly demanding de-escalation, is Beijing quietly preparing for a second phase by strengthening Iran's defensive capabilities? After the announcement of a US naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, China indicated that it aligns with Iran's position on the issue. Beijing also called on President Donald Trump to remain composed and exercise restraint following the collapse of recent talks with Iran. On April 13th, China's foreign ministry stated that maintaining safety and stability in the Strait of Hormuz should be treated as a priority. Chinese officials further emphasized that secure passage through the strait is essential to avoid disruptions affecting other nations and global trade. China also stated that it expects both the United States and Iran to adhere to the terms of the two-week ceasefire arrangement.
The Strait of Hormuz is an important route for international goods and energy trade. Safeguarding the security, stability, and unimpeded passage in the Strait of Hormuz serves the common interests of the international community. The root cause of the disrupted passage in the strait is the Iran conflict, and the solution is to achieve a ceasefire as soon as possible. All parties need to remain calm and exercise restraint. China will continue playing a positive and constructive role. The US-Iran talks held in Pakistan are a step toward the de-escalation of the situation. China hopes that all relevant parties will follow the temporary ceasefire arrangement and stay committed to political and diplomatic channels in settling disputes, so as to avoid flare-ups of fighting again and create conditions for the early restoration of peace and tranquility in the Gulf region.
This statement follows remarks by Donald Trump on April 12 indicating that the US Navy would move to enforce a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. After failed peace talks, Iran has warned the United States that Americans may soon miss today's relatively cheap gasoline. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, made the warning on April 12, according to Press TV. Kalibaf suggested that US consumers could soon grow nostalgic for current fuel prices as tensions keep rising. His comments came shortly after President Donald Trump ordered the US Navy to impose a naval blockade on Iran. The move is aimed at the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical sea lanes for international oil shipments. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have continued to escalate following the collapse of peace talks in Islamabad. According to the American Automobile Association, average gasoline prices in the United States are about $4.125 per gallon. Reports say US gasoline prices have already climbed roughly 40% compared to pre-war levels. Oil prices surged again on April 12, after Washington announced a blockade of Iranian ports starting the next day. US crude jumped around 8% to $104.24 per barrel, while Brent crude rose about 7% to $102.29. Iran, for its part, has already restricted passage through the Strait of Hormuz, allowing only a limited number of countries' vessels to pass. Iran's Revolutionary Guards Navy has stated that the strait will not return to pre-war conditions for what it calls adversary states. Meanwhile, the US president has said he does not care if Iran chooses not to return to the negotiating table. China has also rejected recent reports suggesting that it is supplying new air defense systems to Iran. Beijing described claims of any such weapons transfer as unfounded and characterized them as misleading. China's foreign ministry said, and I quote, "China has always adopted a prudent and responsible attitude towards military exports, implementing strict controls. in accordance with its own export control laws and regulations and its international obligations. We oppose unfounded smears or malicious associations." End quote. Meanwhile, the US president's decision to impose a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz has caused concern among allied nations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to update the House on my visit to the Gulf. And, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm today that together with President Macron, I will convene a summit of leaders this week to drive forward the international effort we have built in recent weeks, bringing together dozens of countries to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. The summit will be focused on two things. First, diplomatic efforts to bring pressure to bear for a negotiated end to the conflict and for the strait to be opened. Second, military planning to provide assurance to shipping as soon as a stable environment can be established. And let me be very clear, this is about safeguarding shipping and supporting freedom of navigation once the conflict ends. Because whilst the ceasefire between the US, Israel and Iran is undeniably welcome, it is also highly fragile. The region remains on edge, and a lot of work is required to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to de-escalate the situation, leading to a sustainable ceasefire. In pursuit of that goal, we call for Lebanon to be included urgently in the ceasefire. Diplomacy is the right path, and I welcome the talks taking place this week. Hezbollah must disarm, but I'm equally clear Israel's strikes are wrong. They are having devastating humanitarian consequences and pushing Lebanon into a crisis. The bombing should stop now. In relation to the blockade, let me be clear, as I've been already in the last day or so, that we are focusing our efforts on opening in full the Strait of Hormuz because of the damage it's doing to economies around the world, including our own economy. That is why we've been working with other countries at various levels, and we'll bring them together in a summit later this week. And we, the UK, will not be joining the blockade that the President announced. Can I thank him for his question? And in relation to the language about destroying a civilization, can I really be clear with this House? That was wrong. A threat to Iranian civilians in that way is wrong. These are civilians, let's remember, who've suffered immeasurable harm by the regime in Iran for many, many long years. And that's why they're words and phrases that I would never use on behalf of this government, which is guided by our principles and our values throughout all of this.
The ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz is greatly damaging, and the restoration of the freedom of navigation is of paramount importance for us. We're also worried that a continuous strike on Lebanon threatened to derail the entire process. We are mobilizing relief EU stocks to provide immediate aid to the Lebanese people, but no amount of aid can replace the safety of a permanent peace. A key lesson of the past weeks is that security is indivisible. You cannot have stability in the Middle East or the Gulf while Lebanon is in flames. So we call on all parties to respect the sovereignty of Lebanon and to implement a complete cessation of hostilities. Since the beginning of the conflict, 44 days ago, our bill for fossil fuel imports has increased by over 22 billion euros. 44 days, 22 billion euros, not a single molecule of energy in addition. And this shows the enormous impact this crisis has on our economy. Even if the hostilities ceased immediately and the disruption of energy supplies from the Gulf will persist for some time to come, and therefore we discussed a series of measures that we will present to leaders at the next informal council that we have next week in Cyprus. First and foremost, it is important that we have a robust coordination among the member states, because we've learned in any crisis, unity is our strength. We're also looking into EU-wide coordination of member states' gas storage filling to avoid that many member states go to the market at the same time, so they are competing against each other. And we will also coordinate oil stock releases to achieve the largest possible effect of these releases. And we will ensure that member states' emergency measures will not impact the single market. We should reduce demand while fully respecting the free choice of consumers. So we are looking at energy efficiency levers such as renovation of buildings or the renewal of equipment in industrial operations. These are some measures, but there are also other measures that we will present or will be the core of the presentation of the communication next week on the table of the leaders. There's one thing that all these events make clear. We are paying a very high price for our overdependency on fossil fuels. And the grim reality for our continent is fossil fuel energy will remain the most expensive options in the years to come. But at the moment, we're lagging behind with electrification, behind the United States, for example, behind China. So we will present our electrification strategy also before the summer. This will include an ambitious new target on electrification. Only what gets measured gets done. And to achieve this, we have to remove remaining regulatory obstacles, and we have to mobilize investment.